My name's Charlotte Bennett, though everyone's always called me Charlie, and I'm 34 years old. 3 months ago, I stood in a marquee I'd paid £11,000 for, holding a glass of champagne I'd also paid for, listening to my stepmother tell a woman I'd never met that I wasn't really part of this family. She said it the way you'd mention the weather. Light, breezy, completely unbothered. And the worst part wasn't even the sentence. It was that nobody in that tent so much as blinked, because they'd all heard some version of it before. I want to tell you how I got to that marquee, why I was the one holding the invoice for it, and what I did in the 15 minutes after I heard those words. But first, welcome back if you're a regular here, and if you're new, I'm so glad you found your way to this corner of the internet. This is a channel for the quiet ones, the ones who kept the peace for years and are finally done keeping it. If that sounds like your story too, do stay, drop a comment, and subscribe, because I read every single one of them. Right then, let me take you back to where this really started, which wasn't the marquee at all. It was a hospital corridor in Cheltenham when I was 6 years old. My mother, Diane, died of an aneurysm on a Tuesday in October. No warning, no illness to prepare for, just a headache at breakfast and then, by lunchtime, gone. I don't remember the funeral properly. I remember my grandmother's black coat and the smell of lilies, and I remember my father, Robert, standing at the front of the church, looking like a man who'd forgotten how his own legs worked. What I remember most clearly, though, is the weeks afterwards, when the house went so quiet, you could hear the fridge humming from the hallway. My father tried. I want to be fair to him, because fairness is the only kind of revenge I actually trust. He learned to plait my hair badly. He burnt the fish fingers every single Friday and I ate them anyway, because I could see it mattered to him that I did. For 18 months, it was just the two of us, rattling round a semi-detached house on Prestbury Road. Two people who'd lost the same woman in different ways. Then, when I was 8, my father took me to a garden centre on a Saturday and introduced me to a woman called Patricia, who smiled at me with her mouth and not her eyes. I didn't know it then, watching her admire the roses in her cream mac, but that woman would spend the next 26 years making sure I understood, in 100 small ways, that this family had a version of itself, and I wasn't quite drawn into the picture. They married the following spring, a small registry office affair in Cheltenham, and within the year, Patricia had moved her own 2 children into our house on Prestbury Road. Simon was 10, a year older than me, and Georgina was 6, 2 years younger. And from the very first morning they arrived with their boxes and their bicycles, I understood something had shifted that nobody was ever going to say out loud. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. That's the thing people don't understand about this sort of unkindness. It doesn't arrive as a slap. It arrives as 100 tiny withdrawals, so small you can't hold any single one up as evidence. And yet by the end of a year you're a different currency entirely to everyone else in the house. Patricia redecorated the kitchen that first summer and put up a corkboard by the fridge for family photographs. She filled it carefully, over months, with pictures of Simon's football matches and Georgina's ballet recitals, of the 3 of them. Patricia, Simon, Georgina, at the seaside in Weymouth. Sandy and laughing. There was one photograph of me on that board, from my 9th birthday, and it stayed there, alone, for years, never joined by another, as if that single Tuesday in March had been the whole of my childhood as far as the corkboard was concerned. At dinner, my father would ask about my day, and Patricia would ask about theirs. And somehow the conversation always drifted towards Simon's cricket or Georgina's grades, and I learned to answer questions in as few words as possible, because nobody was actually listening for the answer. When my father was at work, he did long hours at the accountancy firm, and I understand now that Patricia had rather more say over the daily running of that house than he ever knew. She had a particular way of speaking to me that she never once used with her own 2. If I left a plate in the sink, it wasn't Charlotte, could you wash that up? It was some of us weren't raised to leave a mess for other people. If Simon left 3 plates in the same sink, it was simply cleared away without comment. And then there was the line, the one I'd hear, in one form or another, for the best part of 3 decades. The first time she said it properly, I was 11, and I'd asked, quite innocently, whether I could come on the family holiday to the Lake District that summer, since I'd overheard Georgina talking about the cottage they'd booked. Patricia looked at me for a long moment over her cup of tea, and she said, "Darling, that's Simon and Georgina's holiday, with their mother. You do understand the difference, don't you?" I didn't, not really, not then, but I nodded, because I already understood that nodding was the safest thing a girl in my position could do. My father never heard that sentence. Patricia was far too careful for that. She saved her honesty for the moments he was at work or asleep, or standing in the next room with the radio on. And so, for years, the only witness to who Patricia truly was me, an 11-year-old girl slowly learning that in this particular house, love came with conditions, and I had been born on the wrong side of every single one of them. By the time I was 13, the pattern had hardened into something I no longer questioned, the way you stop questioning why the sky is grey in England in November. It simply was. Simon and Georgina had a mother in that house, warm and present and fierce on their behalf, and I had a stepmother, courteous in front of my father, cool the moment his back was turned, and I had learned to live in the gap between those 2 versions of her, without ever once mentioning it existed. There's one afternoon, though, that I want to tell you about properly, because it was the moment I stopped hoping things might quietly improve, and started simply enduring instead. I was 14. It was my school's parents' evening, the one where they hand out the annual awards, and I'd won a prize that year, the English prize, for an essay on Wilfred Owen that my teacher, Mrs. Aldridge, had actually read aloud to the staff room, or so she told me proudly beforehand. I'd been so pleased I could barely eat my tea. My father had a late meeting that evening and couldn't come, and so it was Patricia who collected me. Patricia, who was meant to sit in that hall and watch me walk up for my certificate. She didn't come inside. She sat in the car park the entire evening with the radio on, and when I came out afterwards, certificate in hand, practically vibrating with the kind of pride a 14-year-old doesn't yet know how to hide, she glanced at the paper in my hand and said, "That's nice, Charlotte. Simon's got his rugby trial tomorrow, so we'll need to leave sharp in the morning." That was the whole of it. Not one further word about the prize, the whole drive home. I remember staring out of the window at the streetlights of Cheltenham, going past and understanding, with a kind of cold clarity unusual in a 14-year-old, that I could win every prize this school had to give. And it would never once outweigh, in that woman's eyes, the fact that I wasn't hers. I told my father that night, carefully, the way you'd diffuse something. Not an accusation, just a fact, laid gently on the kitchen table. He looked stricken, and he did speak to her. I heard the low murmur of it through my bedroom wall, and for about a fortnight afterwards, Patricia was scrupulously icily polite to me, which was somehow worse than the coldness had been. Because at least the coldness had been honest. It was around this time that I started spending as many evenings as I could at my Auntie Jean's, my mother's younger sister, who lived 20 minutes away in Bishop's Cleeve and ran the till at a bakery 3 days a week. Jean never once made me feel like a guest in her kitchen. She'd hand me a wooden spoon and a bowl of something needing whisked, and she'd talk to me, actually talk and actually listen, while flour dusted the worktop between us. It was in Jean's kitchen, not Patricia's, that I first learned to bake a proper Victoria sponge, and it was Jean, not Patricia, who kept every single school report I ever brought her in a shoebox on top of her wardrobe. I didn't know yet how much that shoebox would come to matter, but I was 14, and for the first time, I had somewhere in this world that felt like it was actually mine. I left for university in Manchester the September I turned 18, and I want to be honest about something. I didn't cry on the drive up, the way my friends did leaving their mothers at halls of residence. My father drove me up alone. Patricia had a prior engagement, which even at the time I understood to mean she simply hadn't wanted to come, and somewhere around Birmingham, on the motorway, I felt something in my chest loosen that I hadn't even realized had been clenched for 10 years. University was the first place in my life where nobody had already decided, before I'd opened my mouth, how much of the room I was allowed to take up. I studied business, worked 2 evenings a week in a cafe on Oxford Road to cover my own extras, and rang my father every Sunday, religiously, at 6 o'clock. A habit I've never once broken in 16 years. I did not ring Patricia. Nobody ever suggested I should, and I never once volunteered. I graduated with a first, took a graduate job with a marketing firm in Bristol, and threw myself into it the way people throw themselves into things when they've spent their whole childhood needing to prove they take up space worth having. I won't bore you with the whole climb, the late nights, the flat share above a chip shop in Bedminster, the slow, unglamorous grind of actually becoming good at something, but by the time I was 29, I was running my own small consultancy, 3 staff, a client list I was properly proud of, and a mortgage on a Victorian terrace, with my name, and only my name, on the deed. Here's what I want you to understand about those 11 years away from Cheltenham. I never cut my father off. That's important, because this isn't a story about a girl who ran and never looked back. I saw him every few months, always without Patricia if I could manage it, always at a cafe in town, rather than the house on Presbury Road. Because some rooms, once they've taught you what you're worth in them, are very hard to sit in comfortably again. He'd talk about Simon's promotion, about Georgina's wedding, about the extension Patricia was having built on the kitchen, and I'd listen, and nod and feel, quietly, like a guest at the edge of a family photograph I'd technically been born into. Auntie Jean died the winter I turned 31. Heart, very sudden, much like my mother's had been, which felt like some cruel symmetry the universe hadn't needed to bother with. At the funeral, going through her things afterwards with my cousin, I found the shoebox on top of the wardrobe, exactly where it had always lived. Every single school report I'd ever handed her, going back to when I was 9 years old, kept in order, in a woman's house who wasn't even obligated to keep them at all. I sat on her bedroom floor and cried properly, for the first time in years, not for what I'd lost, but for what it told me I'd actually had all along, just never quite in the house I'd been raised in. It was 6 months after Jean's funeral that my father rang me on a Tuesday evening and told me Patricia was retiring after 30 years at the surgery, and that he was hoping to throw her a proper party, and that, without quite realizing what I was agreeing to, was the moment I said the 4 words that would lead me straight into that marquee. Let me help, Dad. I want to be honest with you about why I said it, because I've turned that moment over more times than I can count since, trying to work out whether I was being generous or simply naive. I think, if I'm truthful, it was both. I was 33 years old, successful by any measure that mattered to me, and I'd started to feel a particular kind of tiredness that I think only people who've spent a lifetime managing a difficult relationship will recognize. The tiredness of always being the one holding the door open. I thought, foolishly perhaps, that if I did something big enough, something generous enough, it might finally close the gap that had sat between Patricia and me since I was 8 years old at that garden centre. I thought money and effort could do what 26 years of politeness hadn't managed. I know how that sounds now. I didn't then. My father was thrilled, in the quiet way he's always been thrilled by things, and slightly guilty too. I could hear it in his voice, because I don't think it had ever quite occurred to him. In 3 decades, how much the small imbalances in that house had cost me. "You don't have to do this, Charlie," he said more than once, and I told him, truthfully, that I wanted to. I did want to. I wanted, one last time, to walk into that family and be the one who'd shown up properly, generously, without being asked twice. So I planned it. All of it. I booked a marquee company in the Cotswolds, the good one, the one that does weddings at country houses. And I paid the deposit myself, £11,000 in total by the time the caterers and the string quartet and the flowers were all accounted for. I chose Patricia's favourite flowers, peonies, which I knew only because I'd overheard her mention them to my father once, years before, and had filed the detail away without quite knowing why. I wrote the guest list with my father over the phone, 42 names, colleagues from the surgery, old friends from her book club, Simon and Georgina and their families, and me. I hired a photographer. I ordered a cake from a proper bakery in Cheltenham, 3 tiers, and I stood in that shop choosing the icing myself, thinking, absurdly, of Auntie Jean's kitchen, of flour on a worktop, of a woman who'd never once made me feel like I owed her anything for her kindness. I told nobody at the party that I'd paid for it. That was deliberate. I didn't want it dangled over the evening like a debt Patricia owed me for attending her own celebration. I simply wanted her to have a beautiful send-off after 30 years of work, and I wanted, quietly, privately, for my father to know it had been me. I remember standing in my kitchen in Bristol the morning of the party, steaming the creases out of a green silk dress, and feeling something close to hope, which is a feeling I'd learned, over the years, to be rather careful with where Patricia was concerned. I drove to Cheltenham that afternoon with the invoice folder still in my car boot. Should the marquee company need anything confirming on the day? And I remember thinking, quite clearly, as I turned onto Prestbury Road for the first time in years, whatever happens this evening, I have done this properly. I have done this with love. Nobody in that garden will ever be able to say I didn't try. I had no idea, pulling into that driveway, that within 3 hours I'd be standing at the edge of my own marquee, listening to the woman I'd just spent £11,000 honouring, telling a stranger I wasn't really part of this family at all. The garden looked beautiful, I'll give it that. The marquee I'd paid for sat, lit up gold against the July evening, peonies on every table exactly as I'd chosen them. The string quartet setting up in the corner while caterers moved between guests with trays of Buck's Fizz. My father found me almost immediately, pulled me into a hug that lasted a beat longer than usual, and murmured, "Thank you, Charlie," properly, "Thank you," against the side of my head. For about 40 minutes, I let myself believe the evening might simply be lovely. Patricia arrived to applause, in a blue dress I recognized, and moved through the marquee accepting compliments with the easy grace of a woman who has genuinely spent 30 years being good at her job. I hung back, deliberately, near the edge of the tent, wanting her evening to belong entirely to her. I was talking to Georgina's husband about something entirely unmemorable when I heard my own name, carried across from the next table on the particular pitch of a voice that spent decades pretending to be warmer than it is. "Oh, Charlotte? She's Robert's from his first marriage," Patricia was saying, to a woman I didn't recognize, someone from the surgery by the look of her lanyard. "She's not really part of this family, not properly, but it's kind of her to come." She said it lightly, the way you'd mention a change in the weather, and then she laughed, actually laughed, and reached for a canap off a passing tray and moved on to her next conversation, as though she hadn't just handed a stranger, at the party I'd paid £11,000 to give her, the exact sentence that had been quietly dismantling me since I was 11 years old. I want to tell you I felt rage. What I actually felt, standing there with a glass of champagne going warm in my hand, was a strange and total stillness, The kind you feel right before you finally do the thing you've spent your whole life too well-mannered to do. I set my glass down on the nearest table. I walked to where the string quartet had just finished a piece, and I asked their leader, quietly, whether I might borrow the small microphone the caterers had set up for the toasts later in the evening. He handed it over without question. The marquee quietened the way rooms do when a microphone crackles to life unexpectedly. Patricia turned, mid-sentence, her champagne halfway to her mouth, and I watched her face do something complicated when she saw who was holding it. "I won't keep you all from your evening," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt, which I've since learned is simply what happens when you've been rehearsing a sentence, without knowing it, for 26 years. I just wanted to say a proper thank you to everyone for coming to celebrate Patricia's 30 wonderful years at the surgery. And I wanted to say, since it seems there's been a little confusion this evening about who's actually family here, this marquee, the flowers, the band, the cake, you'll all be having shortly. That was my gift to her. From Robert's daughter, the one who isn't really part of this family. Nobody laughed this time. My father's face, across the tent, had gone the particular shade of grey I remembered from my mother's funeral. Patricia stood very still, her canap still in her hand, and for the first time in 26 years, I watched her have absolutely nothing prepared to say. I handed the microphone back to the quartet leader with a small, genuine thank you, and for a moment the marquee simply hung there, 42 guests suspended in that particular silence that follows a truth nobody was quite ready for. Then, very quietly, someone near the back began to clap. I found out afterwards it was Jean's old friend from the bakery, whom I'd invited without really thinking Patricia would notice, and a few others followed, uncertain, the way people clap when they're not entirely sure what they're applauding, only that something honest has just happened in front of them. My father crossed the grass towards me before Patricia had even found her feet. He didn't say anything at first. He just put his hand on my shoulder, the same hand that used to plait my hair badly when I was 6, and I watched 26 years of things he'd never quite let himself see arrange themselves properly on his face for the first time. "Charlie," he said, and then, "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know it was still like that." I believed him. I'd always believed him, actually, which had been part of the problem. Patricia had been careful for a reason, and my father's decency had made him easy to keep in the dark. Patricia found me by the drinks table perhaps 10 minutes later, her blue dress suddenly looking less like a celebration and more like a costume she wanted out of. She didn't apologize, not properly, not that evening. What she said was, "That wasn't meant to be heard the way you're taking it, Charlotte," which is, I've come to learn, precisely what people say when they're sorry to have been caught, rather than sorry for the thing itself. I didn't shout. I didn't cry, though I'd expected I might. I simply said, quite calmly, the sentence I'd apparently been saving my whole life for the right evening. "I paid for tonight because I hoped, one last time, that showing up properly might finally be enough for you," I told her. "It isn't going to happen again. Not because I'm angry, Patricia, but because I've finally understood something it took me 26 years to learn. I was never going to earn a place in this family from you. You'd already decided, at a garden centre when I was 8, that there wasn't room. That's all right. I've built a family of my own since then. You just weren't required for it." And then I turned and went to find my father, and we spent the rest of the evening talking properly, the two of us at a table near the peonies, in a way we hadn't managed in years. Patricia and I haven't spoken since, not beyond the barest civility at my father's birthday last spring, which he now hosts at a restaurant in town, deliberately I think, so the ground beneath us is neutral. He rings me every Sunday, without fail, same as always, and last month he asked, almost shyly, whether I'd teach him Auntie Jean's Victoria sponge recipe. because he'd like something of hers in the house that Patricia's corkboard never made room for. I said yes, obviously some doors don't need slamming. They simply, finally, get to close properly, on your own terms at last. If this reminded you of a party, a table, or a corkboard you were never quite pictured on, tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you're new here, do subscribe, because there's always another quiet story waiting its turn to be told. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Calm Family Secrets for more powerful revenge stories, unforgettable family dramas, and inspiring life lessons. Every story has a secret, and every secret has a lesson. Don't forget to add your comments if you have learned lessons from such kind of life lessons. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.